You've seen the movies. The samurai stands in full armor, completely still, completely composed, a living statue of discipline and honor. But here's the thing nobody ever puts in the movie. That armor weighed up to 30 kilograms. It took 2 people and 20 minutes to put on. And nature doesn't care about your honor code. So what did samurai actually do when they had to go to the bathroom? The answer is more interesting and more human than you'd expect. Let's start with the armor itself, because this is where the story gets surprisingly clever. Traditional samurai armor, known as yoroi, wasn't a single solid shell. It was an engineering puzzle. Dozens of separate pieces of lacquered leather and iron, all laced together with silk cords. The helmet, the chest plate, the shoulder guards, the leg pieces, each one tied and layered over the others in a specific order. Beautiful to look at, extremely inconvenient to remove in a hurry. But here's the part that most people don't know. The lower section of the armor, the hanging plates around the hips, called the kusazuri, were deliberately designed to move. They weren't fixed in place. They could be lifted or pushed aside, creating just enough access for a crouching samurai to answer the call of nature without removing a single piece of his equipment. This wasn't an accident. This was intentional design. Somewhere in feudal Japan, an armor maker sat down and thought carefully about this exact problem and built the solution directly into the construction. Practicality hidden inside elegance. That's a very Japanese idea. Now, when samurai weren't in the field, they lived in or near castles and wealthy estates, and Japanese castles had actual toilet facilities, which puts them well ahead of most of the world at the time. These early facilities were called Kawaya, which translates roughly to river house. And the name tells you everything. They were small structures built at the edge of a building, sometimes extending over a river or a pit, so that gravity and water did the work naturally. Simple, functional, effective. By the Edo period, the long era of relative peace when samurai culture truly flourished, wealthier households had moved on to something more refined. Dedicated rooms called Setchin screened off from the rest of the house, sometimes equipped with wooden footrests or raised platforms. Private, purposeful, designed with the same attention to function that the Japanese applied to almost everything. And here's something that genuinely surprises most people in the West. While medieval Europe was largely treating human waste as something to be thrown into the street and forgotten, Japan had built an organized economy around it. Human waste from cities and estates was collected regularly, not discarded but sold to farmers as fertilizer. This wasn't primitive. This was sophisticated agricultural thinking centuries ahead of its time. Farmers paid good money for the supply from wealthy neighborhoods because rich people ate better food, which produced higher quality waste, which grew better crops. Samurai households, eating well and living in large numbers, were considered premium suppliers. The whole system was clean, organized, and completely without shame. To the Japanese, this was simply common sense. Now you're probably wondering about the follow-up question. The one everyone is actually thinking about but nobody says out loud. What did they use to wipe? Paper as we know it didn't exist yet in most of the world, but Japan had one of the strongest paper-making traditions anywhere on Earth, and used paper, letters, documents, wrapping, was commonly repurposed for hygiene. Wealthier samurai had access to this. Others used something called chugi, small flat sticks of wood, roughly the size of a chopstick, used for cleaning and then washed and reused. It sounds uncomfortable. It was probably uncomfortable. But it was the standard across much of the ancient world, and the Japanese version was at least accompanied by water, which was routinely used alongside or instead of any dry material. This practice survives in various forms across Asia to this day and, if you think about it honestly, makes more hygienic sense than most alternatives. The point is that samurai were not wandering through history in filth and confusion. Japanese culture had practical, considered answers to every practical human problem, including this one. But what about war? Because a castle with a Setchin is one thing, 30,000 men marching across open countryside toward an enemy army is something else entirely. Armies on campaign had strict and specific rules about sanitation, and not just for comfort. Dysentery, cholera, and other waterborne diseases killed more soldiers in medieval warfare than swords or arrows did. Any commander who ignored sanitation wasn't just managing discomfort, he was managing a slow collapse of his entire fighting force. So designated areas were established away from camp, always downwind and downstream from sleeping quarters and food preparation. Distance from water sources was enforced, lower-ranking soldiers, and there was always a hierarchy even for this. were assigned to dig latrines and manage the waste. It was unglamorous work. It was also essential work, and everyone understood that. In the chaos of actual battle, the rules of course dissolved. Fear does things to the human body that no amount of training fully overrides. This was understood, acknowledged, and very deliberately never spoken of. A samurai could face death with composure, but he was still human, and his body responded to danger the same way every human body does. The code of Bushido addressed courage, loyalty, and the art of dying well. It had nothing specific to say about what happened in the moments of pure terror before the fighting started. Some things were simply left unrecorded. There's something almost comforting about that. The samurai of history, the real ones, not the movie versions, were not superhuman. They were people living inside an extraordinary culture, following an extraordinary code, and still dealing with every ordinary, unglamorous, unavoidable thing that being alive involves. The armor was magnificent, and the philosophy was profound, and somewhere behind all of it, a soldier was looking for a private spot downwind from camp, exactly like soldiers in every army in every era of human history. The legend is real. The humanity behind it is more interesting. If this kind of history is what you're looking for, the parts that actually happened, not just the parts that made it into the paintings, then subscribe. There's a lot more coming. Next video, what did samurai actually do with fear? They had an entire philosophy built around the idea that they didn't feel it. The reality was considerably more complicated. That one is up next.